In the same way, it can increase the quality of information that we receive through our sensory inputs and can help us refine our thinking and behavior.
One of the critical factors that controls change in the brain is attention. So the brain has a way basically of turning a spotlight on the things that you are, quote, attending to. I'm very accurately recording all the details and I can remember them. I will remember this because I've attended to it, and plasticity has been enabled in this circumstance. Change has been enabled in my brain as a function of the enabling impacts of attention. Attention is actually regulating what is allowed to change. I only change things that I'm aware of, that I'm attentive to, right? And as a function of the focus of my attention. That's why it's so crucial when you're in a learning mode. Attention be focused, sharp, serious, ideally, because those are the conditions of relatively strong enabling of change, relatively selective enabling of change that drives positive learning, positive brain change.
I like the idea of fame in the brain. Any conscious perception is only conscious because you have recruited a certain number of neurons to be associated with it. And at any given time that can change. And there's different factors that are going to change what you're conscious of. That attention is one of those things that can make conscious ideas or any idea more famous in your brain, more likely to become conscious. That if you say to yourself, okay, I'm really going to focus on this now, that's going to heighten the activity of all the surrounding neurons. Of course, you're not always in control of your attention, and there's certain things that you're reflexively going to pay attention to. If there's a very loud bang, you're going to pay attention to that probably just out of some basic instincts more than you might pay attention to your algebra text or whatever you're trying to learn.
If you've been in the same job for 20 years, you're not getting into that intensive learning experience that you had to do when you first learned the job or when you were studying a vocabulary for a French or Spanish exam. And it's that kind of intensive training that you need to get the modulatory or the regulating mechanisms of plasticity in good shape. Just as when you want to improve your cardiovascular health, you have to push yourself. You have to really push yourself cognitively and pay very, very close attention just to increase your cognitive ability. And reading the paper won't do it. And doing the things that you like, dancing the old dances won't do it. But dancing new dances where you have to strain to learn the steps will do it.
Attentional control can be far weaker and far less selective in later life than when we're young. Plasticity is hampered by these attentional losses. To better understand how that affects us as we age, we need to investigate modulatory neurotransmitters. These are small chemical molecules whose release results in turning on the plasticity switches in our brain.
These same neuromodulators are contributing very positively to your sense of well-being. Dopamine is contributing to how positive, how pleasurable, how fun life is. Noradrenaline in its release is contributing to how alert, how bright you feel. It's also contributing to signals of alarm or danger or trouble when they appear. And those are important. It's important that you have those nuances in the control or regulation of your behavior and your feelings. Acetylcholine is contributing to your feelings of brightness, alertment, engagement, how engaged you are in behavior and so forth. So as this machinery slowly dies off, guess what else is happening? The person that you are, the bright, energetic, enthusiastic, with it person that you are, is slowly fading. So it's very crucial that you keep this machinery in tip-top shape. And it's very crucial if you've let it decline, or a really good idea if you let it decline, that you buck it up again and improve its functionality. Because you won't just get the bonus of better learning and stronger vivification of memory from it. You'll get the addition of having a brighter life, more cheerful life, joyful life, hypothetically, alerter, more engaged life.
When tasks are too easy or routine, things we do every day, for instance, our actions don't release those neurotransmitters. Instead of learning, we're using the skills that the brain already knows. This turns the plasticity switch to off, and nothing changes in the brain. Our ability to affect change in our brain is also affected by our drive and willingness to leave our comfort zones.
When we're young, it's all about the acquisition of ability. At some point, we cross a transition in which we're mostly acquiring ability, to a point in which we're mostly using abilities that we've already acquired. We become users. And now most of our time is spent using the skills and abilities that we've mastered in our younger life. Now we're no longer spending most of our day acquiring ability or information. We're churning it up from our past. We're relying on all of those things we know about. We want to do the things that we've mastered. Don't tell me I should learn a new game. I'm good at golf. We all get, quote, set in our ways. And what this is really reflecting is that we're seeking the comfort of the things we've already mastered that we're good at. We think of learning in terms of content. We don't think of improving our brains and how they could acquire that content. Real learning is continually elaborating what is us and our abilities. That makes us more effectively operating in the world and controlling ourselves, our brains and our bodies in life.
Learning new tasks and challenging our minds in a very focused way is the best way to slow mental aging. Acquiring new skills is important, but without remembering, the brain cannot harness its true power. One of the keys to our memory lies in our hippocampus.
So there's this guy who was one day found wandering along the side of the highway, and the state policeman who picked him up asked him his name, and he gave his name and said that he was stationed at a nearby army base and gave his age as 22 years old. And I don't know if the officer realized it or not, but he must have appeared at least a decade older than that, because he was. And he didn't live at this army base anymore, although he had been stationed there when he was about 22. And it turns out that he had just lost all of the memories of the last 11 years, gone. He didn't remember that he had had 2 kids. He thought that his wife was still just about to have the first kid. And it turned out that he had a cyst that was pressing on the conduit between the hippocampus and the rest of his brain. Once that cyst was drained, all of his memories returned. What this is a really rare living example of the most interesting thing I think about the hippocampus and memory, which is that for memories that are what they call declarative, meaning memories that you can talk about, what I had for breakfast or where I was born, these memories are initially brought into the hippocampus, and it is only after time that they're sent out to the cortex.
Brain change, harnessing the potential for positive plasticity. These are the hallmarks for maximizing the level of your own brain fitness. A clear example of this can be seen in the real-world applications of plasticity, as seen in the rehabilitation therapy of patients who've suffered a stroke or traumatic brain injury.
The phone rang around 6:20, and I looked at caller ID and it said Fort Campbell, and I knew, So I just said, "John's my son, is he okay?" And he said, "Ma'am, there's been an incident."
Well, I remember running up to a Humvee to start unloading it, and all I remember was falling down, and I thought I smacked my head on my rifle. When I got up, I wiped my forehead, and there was a little bit of blood on it, and I guess the mortar round had exploded about 5 feet away from me, and shrapnel had gone straight through my helmet and then straight through my head.
The affected arm had a greater deficit at shoulder and elbow than the fingers, but even the fingers, he had no dexterity, the thumb was extremely weak, and there was almost nothing that he could do with the arm.
Edward Taub's therapy that he pioneered at the University of Alabama at Birmingham was developed in the service of rehabilitation of brain damage, whether that damage was caused by a traumatic brain injury, like that experienced by John Barnes, or by something like a stroke.
If you constrain the good arm so that the patient doesn't rely on it, but instead through intensive therapy, which is about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a couple of months or more, but just encourage and coax and urge that patient to use the seemingly paralyzed arm, which sounds paradoxical, but they can. They can make tiny little movements, and if they build on those, they can regain function.
Dr. Taub's therapy had similar success with another traumatic brain injury patient, Army veteran Christopher Lynch.
It's marvelous working with John and with Chris because they have the discipline of military training. So they approach this as if this were boot camp or basic training.
Undertaking the Taub therapy requires commitment on the part of the patient and the caregiver.
Recovery does not stop after you get out of the therapy sessions, out of the classroom therapy. You go home and you keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep motivation. It's the motivation that you need to have.
I was a little skeptical. I saw simplistic, repetitious movement in the therapy that he was doing. He had a mitt on his hand. It all made common sense to me, but I wasn't too sure. I still had my questions. You know, is this really going to work? 3 days into the therapy, Chris woke up in the morning and had had a dream. That was the first surprising thing that I felt meant something. He hadn't dreamt in 2 years.
My brain, it felt like the brain was firing. It's like the more you work the brain, the more it heals itself in a way.
On the way home from therapy, we were between here and Montgomery, Alabama, and Chris automatically reached up and pushed the button on the radio with his left hand. And it was, it blew me away. I looked at him and I was just extremely surprised by it. And he looked at me and said, "What?" So I knew he didn't actually have to think about pushing the button on the radio. It happened.
The main theme of CI therapy, you either use it or you lose it. And if you've already lost it, that's okay. You can get it back if you keep trying.
Through the experiments of neuroscience pioneers, we now know that learning, skill acquisition, and memory creation are neurological and biological processes. Armed with this new knowledge, the concept of brain span versus lifespan became a new frontier worth examining. Because it is a biological process, the brain naturally deteriorates with age. But because of the power of plasticity, the ability for the brain to change itself, the real age of the brain does not always correspond to the body's age. As a society, we're living longer. How can we make our brain span match our lifespan? When we return, we'll learn the 7 tenets of plasticity and how we can best set our minds to making the changes that matter. Stay with us for more of the Brain Fitness program.